Welcome to the newest episode in an ongoing Legendarium series about the greatest knights. In this installment, Gotz von Berlichingen, we will talk about a knight who lost his hand very early in his military career, yet had an iron prosthetic made that allowed him to continue fighting into his 60s. Gotz von Berlichingen was born around 1480 to a wealthy family in Württemberg. His education was typical for young men of the upper class, with a focus on writing, sword fighting, and military tactics. Yet even as young Gotz received his education, the old chivalric system, which relied on ties between knights and lords, was being replaced by the mercenary armies of the early modern age. At the age of 16, Gotz joined the army of Brandenburg-Ansbach in their war against the Swiss Confederacy. After 4 years of war, Gotz retired from the army at the age of 20 and used his wealth and connections to raise a mercenary company which he rented out to Duke Albert IV of Bavaria. About 4 years later, at the age of 24, Berlichingen was participating in the siege of Landshut Castle. During the fighting, a cannonball sheared off his right hand, taking his sword with it. This misfortune should have ended his military career. Instead, he turned to the ironsmiths of Nuremberg, who were among some of the most innovative technologists of their day. They made him an iron hand, which had 100 moving parts, including gears and springs, complete with fingernails sculpted on to the iron hand. Though he could catch a ball with this new hand, he decided that he needed something a little sturdier and more flexible. So he had a second model made, which covered his entire forearm and was secured to his elbow with a leather strap. It included bendable joints that allowed him to write, grip his sword, and even use the reins of his horse. With this iron prosthetic, he was able to continue working as a soldier of fortune for the next 10 years. For the most part, he and his company served the minor lords of the Holy Roman Empire in their feuds with other minor lords. And when there wasn't a war going on, Berlichingen would simply kidnap wealthy merchants on the road and hold them for ransom. Needless to say, some of those merchants began to complain to the emperor, and since those merchants paid much more in taxes than knights like Berlichingen did, the emperor placed an imperial ban upon Berlichingen in the year 1512. Imperial officers seized his armor and sword and forced him to remain in his house for 2 years until he paid a fine of 14,000 gold coins to lift the ban. Only a few years later, he broke the terms of his parole by participating in the kidnapping of the Count of Swabia, which, needless to say, the emperor frowned upon. The imperial ban was put in place. Sometime around 1520, Berlichingen decided to redeem himself. Though middle-aged, he fought against the Swabian League for his home duchy of Württemberg. During the fighting, he was captured and held for ransom. By the time that he was released and returned home, the Peasants' Revolt had broken out. Tens of thousands of peasants, some led by charismatic preachers talking about a new Eden, rose up against their feudal lords. They looted manors and slaughtered the knights who oppressed them. For a time, Gotz became the leader of one of these peasant companies. We don't know for certain why he joined, yet when he sensed that the tide was turning against the peasants, he had no qualms about deserting the peasant band that he led for a time and turned himself into an imperial court. There he claimed that the peasants had forced him to join them in their war, and he left because he became disgusted by their crimes. This must have impressed the court because he was allowed to go. However, the peasants that Berlichingen abandoned were likely among the 100,000 peasants who were slaughtered by the aristocracy of the Holy Roman Empire to preserve their wealth and power. Berlichingen continued fighting into his 60s. In 1524, he served in Hungary during that nation's war against the Ottoman Turks. About 2 years later, he joined the House of Habsburg in their war against France. Then Berlichingen did something that must have surprised everybody. He retired and lived quietly at Castle Hornburg, his family seat. There he began writing his memoirs before he died at the age of 80. His memoirs would be republished in the 1700s. They helped to make him a national hero in Germany, where today he is seen as one of the last knights, a man of honor who struggled to maintain the chivalric code in a world that was changing fast. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.